Okay, you can.
Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Blanca Lopez. I'm a Berkeley alumni. Welcome to our second webinar on climate finance today with the UC Berkeley Global Society. We are an alumni association and a platform which looks to discuss policy and legal issues with a sectoral approach. In this webinar, we will be exchanging about REDD+ and AFOLU carbon markets with social standards in Latin American region. We will see updates, learn lessons, and challenges. And we are very lucky to have an amazing panel today with us. Thank you a lot. Thank you, the three of you, to be here with us today. And let me introduce you to our guest speakers. Welcome, Jorge. Jorge Torres, he's co-founder and CEO of Pascal. He's an economist from Universidad Católica de Perú with a specialization in public management. He's currently studying a master's degree in climate change in la Universidad Científica del Sur. He has 25 years of experience in climate finance and sustainable development, especially in the Amazon. He has worked in the public sector, both at national and subnational levels, as well as in the private and non-profit sectors. He has advised indigenous people and farmers organizations. He has participated in the regulation of main REDD+ tools and instruments in Peru and implemented successfully the first REDD+ projects in Peru. Thank you, Jorge, for being with us today. Then welcome Manuel. Manuel Estrada, he's Verra's REDD+ and AFOLU director. He provides AFOLU he provides relevant policy and technical input to ensure REDD+ and AFOLU related standards with methodologies and program innovations and support, and align with relevant international and domestic policy frameworks. Manuel also works with Verra's market development team to support update and impact of Verra's nature-based solutions. Before joining Verra, Manuel worked on climate change issues for more than 20 years. He worked for the Ministry of Environment of Mexico for a decade as director on climate change at the International Affairs Unit. He participated in the UNFCCC negotiations, and Manuel has also contributed to development and validation of VCS AFOLU project methodologies and tools. So thank you so much, Manuel, for your time today. Finally, welcome Chris. Christopher leads Verra's work on the climate, community, and biodiversity standards, the CCB, and the Sustainable Development Verified Impact Standard. Christopher focused on providing guidance and support to project developers, third-party auditors, also methodology developers, and other stakeholders. Prior to joining Verra, Christopher performed environmental and natural resource management research for the United States Agency for International Development. Before that, Chris served in the Peace Corps in Zambia as a rural aquaculture extension agent. Thank you, Chris. And finally, myself, I will be your moderator. As I say, my name is Blanca. I'm a Berkeley Law alumni. I'm a legal consultant by FIAP, the Spanish government cooperation agency, and I'm working at the Ministry of Environment of Peru at the Directorate for Climate Change. Prior to Peru, I was a project officer at the European Union for a program in protected areas. And I'm currently doing an independent research on AFOLU carbon rights frameworks in Peru. So today we have a very broad audience. We have students, we have general public, but also professionals. So before going to the conversation and dialogue with our experts, I would like to provide you with some basic definitions we will see today and provide you with context to our topic. So let's start. First, we are going to talk about REDD+. So what is REDD? REDD is in 2005, United Nations for Climate Change states developed the approach known as REDD. And REDD is the acronym for reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries. It was REDD and then it became REDD+. And what is REDD+? REDD+ is a forest-based approach, a policy approach, a forest-based climate change mitigation approach, which aims to provide positive incentives for developing countries. At the Cancun agreements, the convention states set out 5 REDD+ activities. If you want to be recognized as a REDD+ project, you must fit in one of these 5 activities that, however, are very broad, as we are going to see. These activities are, first, reduction of emissions from deforestation, but also from forest degradation. Also we have conservation of forest carbon stocks, sustainable management of forests, and enhancement of forest carbon stocks. It's important to know that all REDD+ projects must respect and must meet REDD+ safeguards. What are safeguards? Safeguards are principles, rights, and criteria that should guide the design of any action you want to implement in order to minimize the risk and enhance the social but also the environmental benefits that the implementation of any climate action may bring. Also in the Cancun Agreement, states agreed to put the basis of these 7 safeguards. Then the national countries must take these safeguards and provide a national interpretation of these safeguards, and the basis were these 7 ones. The first one is that any REDD+ project or climate change action fulfilling these safeguards, they must implement actions complement or consistent with the objectives of national forest programs and law. Also, they must have a transparent and effective national forest governance structures. They must respect knowledge and rights of indigenous peoples. Also, they must implement effective and full participatory processes with all relevant stakeholders. Their activities must be consistent with the conservation of natural forests and biological diversity. And finally, also, these actions must address the risk of reversal, and actions must reduce displacement of emissions. Then we have carbon markets. We can divide the structure of carbon markets into regulated carbon markets and voluntary carbon markets. Today in this webinar, we focus on AFOLU carbon markets, which are agriculture, forestry, and other land use projects. If these projects go to a regulated carbon market, as for example, the Clean Development Mechanism, but there are also other domestic markets, if they implement it respecting the rules of these mechanisms, they will obtain a certified emissions reduction, or CER. However, if they go to the voluntary carbon markets, they will fulfill the rules of, for example, these international standards, for example, Vera, where Manuel and Christopher work. Also, we have the gold standard, and we have other international standards. In this case, these projects, they will obtain verified carbon. They will obtain verified carbon units, or VCU, that were previously known as VCS. And now, please, before beginning our debate with our guest speakers, I would like to share with you some data, some deforestation data. In this graph, if we observe the deforestation trends in the South American region, we can observe that, for example, Ecuador, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, the deforestation rate is relatively low compared to the other countries of the region. And then if we look at Colombia, the data, we see that they have a boom. In 2016, they had a boom of deforestation rates. Then in 2019 and 2020, they are coming back to pre-boom levels. And then we have Peru, that in 2018, they had a decrease in deforestation rates, but compared to the previous years, they still have a relatively high deforestation rate. And then we have Brazil. And Brazil is, as you see in this graph, it is at another level compared to the other countries of the region. And I would like also to share this title published by Worldwide Fund 4 months ago in August 2020, as they published that annual deforestation rate in the Brazilian Amazon increases by 33%. So it's an important data. And so, taking into account deforestation data and your experience in REDD, we would like to know from our panelists, in your opinion and experience, perhaps you can share with us your inputs about these questions. What is the contribution of REDD Plus to forest conservation in Latin America? From your point of view and your experience, what have been the biggest challenges to implement REDD Plus at a national level and at project level also, and what challenges remain? And what are the key elements to achieve REDD Plus goals in Latin American region? Perhaps we can start with Jorge. Please, Jorge, if you can share with us your opinion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Blanca, and through you to the Berkeley Society for the opportunity to exchange ideas and enrich our approach with this fantastic and expert panel with Manuel and Chris, and also the so diverse and high qualified audience that Berkeley has been able to convoke. Yeah, I think that title could not be better selected. Because we are indeed in front of a challenge. Are the carbon markets able to halt, to slow the trend observed in your graph? And if they are they able to do it with social legitimacy? After more than a decade of field implementation, of REDD implementation, question remains very valid. At a first glance, if you see the graphs, it seems that REDD has not made a huge contribution to forest conservation. Deforestation, as you have shown, is stable or increasing, and in any case is declining. So, who is responsible of this situation? Is REDD responsible of this situation? How has REDD been implemented in those countries? And how has REDD been able to compete with other policies? Brazil trend, for instance, seems more related to macro politics than to effectiveness of REDD actions. Other countries, Brazil, Bolivia, and Ecuador, have not allowed to use the carbon markets, at least for AFOLU activities. While on the other side, Peru is plenty of local initiatives, trading in voluntary carbon markets. And in the most recent years, Brazil, Peru, and Colombia governments has established bilateral agreements at jurisdictional scale. And after all of this mixture of approaches, we have those numbers that you have shown. So can we ask what approach has failed? What scale? It's difficult to say in 10 minutes, but after more than a decade of so diverse experience, and seeing the magnitude of the threats that our forests are facing, it should be clear for all the stakeholders that the forests need to all of us. working together. No one alone can do it well enough, nor the government, nor the non-state actors. It seems very easy to say, but it's not so easy to implement. Um, so I think that the secret to win this match is to have differentiated but integrated roles. Public and private players are urged to have a fruitful dialogue with the government providing clear rules to attract sufficient resources needed to finance this fight against forest loss. And markets may play a central role in this challenge because we should not forget that finally the share of the pie managed by private sector largely overwhelm public resources, even though they are not using this potential, um, likely because they only invest a very small part of this in environmental actions because they consider part of their corporate social responsibility instead of seeing as a business opportunity. Business and environment shouldn't be seen as opposite necessarily. There are good examples of businesses that has helped to conserve the forest, ecotourism, non-timber forest products. Can we, can we make carbon to be part of this golden list? I would say that the answer is yes, if we adopt a territorial approach, working with the complexity of stakeholders that coexist in the territory, in the landscape, instead of working only with the good guys, is essential. Deforestation is not produced by people who hate the forest, but in many cases, deforestation is associated with small-scale rural families that need to maintain their families. Of course, it's not all the cases. Of course, there's part of deforestation that is associated with large companies, but at least in our countries in Latin America, in Peru specifically, that I know better, the large percentage of deforestation is associated to small scale rural families that do not have enough resources, do not have technology, do not have the knowledge of environmental services potential. So we should not exclude to these families from the solution, but they have to be part of the solution. This is the first if I would say. The second if is if you use the resources smartly as seed capital to change permanently the pattern of land use instead of only paying people temporarily for not deforesting. Because if you pay, okay, they will stop deforesting during the time that you pay. But you are not changing anything. You are only creating a dependence. So I think that the limited resources that that REDD can provide should be used as seed capital to create sustainable economic alternatives to landowners. So I would say that this is the second if. The third if, and maybe we can find many others, but I don't want to extend too much. But the third if is that we have to focus not only in how much we do, but also in how we do. Not only define, what I mean is not only calculating how much reductions your intervention creates, but how you create those reductions, how sustainable, not only in economic terms, which is important, but also in social terms. And here it is important, and CCB, of course, Chris can share his large experience of positive examples of interventions with a high level of participation of local communities. But a real commitment of the investments with the participation of local communities throughout the whole process is the best insurance for sustainability, and at the end, for the profitability of private investments. A tip for private investors is to take seriously that the investment in safeguards, the investment in a real commitment with participation and sharing the decision taking with local communities is the best insurance, as I say, to ensure that the intervention can have a social legitimacy and sustainability in the time. So all the risks, all these technical words that reversal and so is finally can be summarized to social commitment and social and real participation of local communities. So to conclude at this first intervention, we must be self-criticism. REDD has spent a lot of time designing and negotiating the rules. While people in the forest, when you go to the forest and when you talk to the people in the forest feel that few benefits have been carried out to them. And it is clear that financial resources need to be leveraged. It is clear that the role of the government and the role of the standards and donors has to understand the magnitude of the threat to create markets, to enhance markets, fair markets with social standards can help to make it possible. I am convinced that markets can play a role, but in this vision of with social standards, as you have, as the title has been highlighted. So I want to stop at this point. I just want to say that we as Pascal want to contribute to set it up. This is something that is on design. We must be part of the building of the rules. The rules have to correspond to the reality, and this is something that we all are invited to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorge, for your insightful and inputs on this topic. Perhaps Manuel can give us his inputs now.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Blanca, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for, to Murphy for the invitation to have this discussion here with you today. And going to the questions you have provided here. About the contribution of REDD to the forest conservation in Latin America, I would say, first, it is important to have a clear definition of REDD. I mean, REDD, of course, is reducing emissions from deforestation, degradation, and so on. The role of conservation and enhancement of forest carbon stocks. No, but the thing is, REDD, I would say there has been 3 phases for REDD. And the first one is when the UNFCCC started what was called in 1995 the pilot phase for activities implemented jointly. No? At that time, there were not really voluntary markets. There were only a few ideas of having conservation projects, and someone paying for that conservation in exchange of some certificate saying that you have supported the conservation of forests and carbon stocks or whatever. No, so very small projects, very few of them, not really a market. No, and with this pilot phase, the idea was to gain experience, to actually come up with market mechanisms under what was going to become the Kyoto Protocol, right? So that was the first let's say the first part or the first era. No? So then we had actual voluntary markets going on more or less more frequently with more actors and more activity. We're still very small. And then we had the discussion. I mean, the Kyoto Protocol came into, in negotiation. It's being negotiated. And as you mentioned, there was the creation of the Clean Development Mechanism. The thing with the Clean Development Mechanism is that it was designed not to allow for REDD projects, for emission avoidance projects in the forest sector. So it only allowed for forestation and reforestation projects. So what happened then after the Kyoto Protocol, when the negotiations on what was going to become the Paris Agreement started, the concept of REDD was included in the negotiations. But this idea of REDD, as it ended up being in the Warsaw framework or the UNFCCC decisions, is basically a finance mechanism, a financial mechanism that is based not on markets, but actually on what is called results-based payments. So under this mechanism, basically, if you reduce emissions as a country or as subnational jurisdiction, you can get access to payments. These payments basically come from governments, are not, as I told you, this is not a market mechanism. It's basically support from developed countries or from other actors that is being paid for results. Instead of giving you ODA to develop some projects, you basically give this ODA in return of results. And these results are emission reductions from deforestation. So that would be like the second phase. And the third phase is the one we are experiencing now, where you have a more developed voluntary market, where you have these results-based payments in place, mechanisms in place. You have, for instance, initiatives such as REDD Early Movers. You have the FCTF Carbon Fund paying for results also, and potentially market. And then, for instance, you also have the Green Climate Fund under the UNFCCC, who pays also for emission reductions to countries. So, and at the same time, as I was saying, you have a market for projects that has been increasing in the last decade. And is now having a boom for a number of reasons, including that, right now there is a lot of demand from oil and gas companies, from airlines, from tech companies, and so on. So I would say that these are the three areas. So about the contribution of REDD to the forest conservation in Latin America, I would say from these three areas, there are many things that can be underlined. The first one was this idea of private actors being able to reach markets to finance forests, even at small scale. So that was and the inclusion of communities and so on. These were the first experiences. Then, with REDD under the UNFCCC, what became important and what is key here, and I would have to disagree with the idea that REDD has failed so far, and I'm going to tell you why, is under the UNFCCC, you do not only have this market or this results-based payment mechanism, but a number of decisions that support and let's say promote the creation of capacities in developing countries. So I have always, before I joined BERRA, as you said, I was a consultant, and I did a lot of consultancy work in Latin America about these issues. And one of the things that I could always find in countries is, forget about the payments, forget about the markets. What is important at that point, or what was important at that point, maybe 5 years ago, is that you're getting money to improve your monitoring, reporting, and the verification and reporting mechanisms. No? You're getting money to improve your data. You're getting money to improve your governance in the forest sector. You're getting money to improve the policy design in the forest sector. No? And not only in the forest sector, but actually in all the land use sector, which is more important. No? So even if you don't get to the payments, even if you don't get to the markets, you already have a lot of money coming in to carry out structural changes or to promote structural changes. Maybe with the money you have from REDD, you won't be able to do this, all of this, no? But at least you do have a political signal, and you have some support, and in some cases, unprecedented support from developed countries for these issues. No? So, I mean, from there, everything the contribution of REDD for me is very clear. No, now why don't I agree with the idea that REDD has failed? Well, I don't agree with that because in most of the countries, the actual policies that are aimed to reducing emissions have not been put in place yet, or are just starting now, or have started 2 years ago or so. So because this readiness phase took, I don't know, from 2010 maybe to 2018 or even more. In many countries, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, even in Latin America, you find many countries that are still not ready to enter a mechanism that is based on result-based payments or markets. No? So in any case, the contribution is there already, and as I not only in economic terms, but also in terms of policy relevance. And yeah, well, so for me, the products of REDD are still to be seen in the coming years, because I mean, REDD policies are not something that imply a lot of changes. In many cases, changes in cultural changes in usual practices or practices that have been carried out for many years or forever in some places, no. And also that is kind of a laboratory for policies. So you cannot expect REDD to actually start reducing emissions. REDD policies to start reducing emissions within a couple of years, no. But actually, the idea is that these emissions reductions would happen, maybe over time, little by little, no? Let's say, and continue over time. That would be the ideal. So yeah, that about the contribution, no? And also, well, the potential contribution, of course, to NDCs, no? To nationally determine the contribution under the UNFCCC, no? Which is also something that we should be talking about here, no? Then, what have been about the second question? No? What have been the biggest challenges to implement REDD at the national level and the project level, and what challenges remain? I mean, one of the main challenges. I will talk now in terms of the. Well, let's start with the projects. I mean, for projects, the REDD projects, the most challenging aspect, I think, relates to methodology. No, it's very difficult to foresee the future. It's very difficult to come up with a methodology that will, with no uncertainty or with very reduced uncertainty, predict the future of what is going to happen in a project area in the next 10 years. No, that's one challenge. And you also have challenges related to the availability of data and so on. At the beginning, you have challenges because, as one of the challenges was the methodologies, because there were no methodologies, and we have to start from zero, developing methodologies. And yes, and Chris will tell you about the challenges related to the safeguards and so on. And this is one of the challenges that remain. I mean, what we are doing right now at Terra is developing consolidated methodology for on-plant REDD projects. On-plant deforestation is the most challenging for building baselines or to predict. So that's what we are doing now. We want to have based on the experience we have gained with the previous methodologies, see, identify what can be improved and actually come up with improvements. And we are aiming to produce a new methodology by the end of the year. Early next year. So that about the project level. At the national level, what I've seen, obviously you have a lot of problems with data, and also that in many cases, countries, in these different programs, the GCF and REDD removers and the FCPF, all of these programs, and including us, because there also has a jurisdictional standard for countries and states and provinces and so on, is that every standard, every program requires different things, are different. In a sense, this makes sense because each one of these programs allows governments to reach a different financing window. So it's like having different flavors of a soda or something. So for each one of them, you have to develop different elements. For instance, a reference level, the reference emissions that you use to assess your performance or the performance of the REDD activities you're carrying out. So that's without a doubt one challenge for countries. Then the other one is data availability, as I was telling you, because in order to construct these forest reference levels, you actually forest emission reference levels, you need data from many, at least let's say 10 years before the start of your policies, so that you can actually build this reference to which you will be comparing your performance. So that's another issue. Then another very important issue is carbon rights. In many, most countries, I think in basically not all, but most of them, carbon rights are not clear. So, for instance, if a government tries to sell the emission reductions that it has monitored in its territory, in the territory of the country, they cannot actually do the transaction or carry out the transaction because the carbon rights may not belong to the state. So you have to actually come up with a mechanism or a way for the owners of the carbon to transfer the rights to you so that you can actually carry out this transaction. Now the problem is, what if the law or the laws of the country, that the legal framework does not specify whose right is, who owns the carbon? So that's a very, very important issue for countries, particularly when they try to enter carbon markets, and also for the FCPF and some other programs. I think that's one of them. Then another challenge that we have seen is, for instance, countries that already have had projects for many years, maybe decades, under the BCS and other standards, that they want to come up with a national program, and to have this program being able to access the markets or issue credits and so on. Then how do you how do you make consistent the estimation of emission reductions between the two levels, the projects and the jurisdiction? And second, how do you ensure that the carbon credits that have been sold by the project are not being also solved by the government, no? Because the government is monitoring the whole area, no? So for that, what we have proposed is a nesting approach, no? Which is part of the standard of our jurisdictional standard that actually allows you to have this consistent carbon accounting within the country, also taking into account individual projects. No? And about the third question, what are the key elements to achieve REDD goals in Latin America? In Latin America, one of the main issues I normally see, and I've seen for many years, is that the staff, of government staff, does not last. So when you finally have someone there that finally understands what you're talking about, finally understands what has to be done, finally understands all the programs that are out there and the opportunities and so on, then you have either a change in the administration and he or she is gone, or she's fired, or whatever, or she or he moves to, I don't know, a consulting company or whatever. No? So that's one issue. I mean, not only for REDD, but in general in Latin American countries, in Latin American governments. And the key elements, another key element would be to have clarity, as I was telling you, about carbon rights, and also have this coordination between different levels of implementation, not only in terms of the carbon market, but also because if you see this, I mean, the carbon, all REDD, no? Considering projects and jurisdictions and resource-based payments and markets as sources of finance, then if you're able to reach many sources of finance, in the end, the country will get more money, and you will be able to carry out more activities, no? And hopefully reduce more emissions and be more effective. No? So I think that's another thing that has to be. I mean, that's key. No, the coordination between projects and governments. Also because it's key and has been recognized for many years now that REDD and in general climate change cannot be achieved just with the goals of the Paris Agreement, and in general any goals for mitigation cannot be achieved only with public money. No? So you have to include the private sector. In order to include the private sector, you have to set in place the let's say enabling conditions. No? And one of them is to have, for instance, the carbon rights, clarity on carbon rights, coordination, and so on. And I will leave it there because I know I have exceeded my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Now, Chris, perhaps you could provide us with your insights and inputs, please.
Sure. And thank you for inviting me during this conversation. It's been very interesting so far. And to be clear, I'm going to speak a little bit more from almost like the project level perspective. With my Manuel has much more background from the VERA perspective on international markets and the jurisdictional approach. And as a program officer with VERA, with the CCV programs, and now our new SD Vista program, I have much more experience to be able to talk about the actual kind of the project level approach to many of these issues, which I think are essentially in parallel. But so for the first question, what is the contribution of REDD? I'm going to kind of go take something that Manuel said, but then kind of run with that, which he said that it can be a laboratory for policy. I would take that even further and say that these can also be a laboratory for not only policy, but for just implementation as well. We'll get to it later, but one of the main challenges still is how to address these drivers of deforestation in these local communities and these local jurisdictional approaches. These projects become essentially good testing grounds for all sorts of different things regarding drivers of deforestation, better community engagement practices, local biodiversity conservation practices, things like that. So again, just they become great resources for the local jurisdictions to learn from, as well as from other private actors to learn from, to improve upon the REDD practices. So moving on to the second question there, what has been the biggest challenges? Again, I'm going to talk about this mostly at the project level. At the project level, many of the main challenges have been regarding land title and things like that, which is pretty straightforward, but the bigger ones have been things related to the community involvement and community understanding. Speaking on Jorge's point about local communities need to be involved in the actual participation in these projects, we completely agree. But that sometimes is much harder, or should say easier said than done. So many of these communities, their first step is just to simply understand for what carbon markets are and what the involvement of this project could be and how it could benefit them, or what are the actual risks that this would have. Secondly, what are their actual rights? While many of these communities don't necessarily have legal rights to any of these lands or resources that they're working on, that still does not mean that in order to be a sustainable REDD project, that other actors can take advantage of those loose or non-existent legal protections. And so understanding communities' rights to these lands and resources is extremely important. And it's a challenge for all projects, and it will be a challenge from the jurisdictional approach as well. And then lastly, as I kind of mentioned before, one of the challenges is just actually identifying these drivers of deforestation and determining appropriate ways for addressing them. So for what challenges remain, that still is to be, what are the best ways to address drivers of deforestation, given the various different contexts that exist all over Latin America. In some areas, it's very clearly just timber harvesting, which becomes the main driver of deforestation. In other areas, it's just agricultural expansion for local smallholders, all sorts of different reasons. And now we're starting to see a large increase, especially in Brazil, of illegal mining completely disrupting large areas of forest, which were once thought could be considered protected. Kind of going back to my overall first point, is these are testing grounds, and so there's all sorts of different problems and issues arise in each one of them, and so the challenges that remain on the project level are numerous, but all involve just simply learning what are the best practices to actually implement. And then lastly, to the third question, what are the key elements to achieving REDD? I'm going to just essentially agree with Manuel on this one. It's going to be the coordination and government support to take advantage of what momentum is already out there. There is a great deal of effort that's been put in thus far, but to a certain extent, some of it, I wouldn't say was wasted, but it is not being taken to its full advantage based on the kind of the differences between what one country wants to do versus another, which one jurisdiction wants to do versus another, or even at the project level, what a project is actually implementing and what the overall jurisdiction wants to implement. That corresponds with addressing drivers of deforestation, as well as just setting what the baselines would be in these various regions. I'm going to leave mine nice and short and sweet, because I believe that Manuel and Jorge already addressed me the main areas to speak about. So.
Thank you so much, Chris, for all these details and information. And now we could, last questions, we could see to AFOLU carbon markets. So regarding AFOLU carbon markets, from your point of view and your experience or your insight, what updates have been developed in AFOLU carbon markets during the last years? And what are the challenges to implement these markets? Also, what advice would you give to project developers like indigenous peoples seeking to develop VCUs in AFOLU carbon markets? And what advice would you give to investors in these markets? I don't know, maybe we can follow the same order. And Jorge, if you have if you want to say some words about it, then.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that it was very interesting to hear Manuel and Chris, and to answer these new questions, and also to make some reflection on their words. Well, I think that, yeah, the challenges that Manuel has described are right. At project level, the methodological issues have been one main challenge, and also at the national level, the issues related with legal framework, because this is very innovative issue, has also been a point. And this is why in the new moment, in the new era, this process of moving from to the jurisdictional level has to, or all this process has to make us think about where do we put the weight. I think that the evolution of REDD has to move to a more efficient use of times and resources, and it's clear that the use of this national data and has become very useful for putting more of the efforts in the field action, which at the end of the day is going to create the reduction of deforestation, which is at the end of the day the essential reason why REDD was born. So I think that we should never forget, and this is one of the updates that is being developed, and the challenges. We must create rules, robust rules that avoid to the creation of hot air and so on, and providing any control, providing control to the risk of double counting and so on. But robust rules has to be simple rules. So most of the efforts or most of the resources, the financial resources, should go to the field implementation. And this is my first reflection here. And the second issue is that governance is key, is part of the solution. But the main solution, it has to include an alternative to the causes of deforestation, which in most of the cases are related to economic incentives of families of drivers of deforestation. So this is why I highlight in my previous intervention that markets and private sector has to lead all these part of the field implementation, combining the role with the public sector, which has to be in charge of the governance, which has to be in charge of the monitoring. But nothing is going to change if the way how the land is used, how the agriculture is done, how the forest is managed, do not change. So I think that this is important to think about. And the third thing that is important to do is that the jump from the project level to the jurisdictional level is not automatic, because in the project level you work with a specific actor. concessions, protected area, indigenous. At the landscape level, you have a combination of multiple actors with different interests and with, in some cases, can maybe opposite interests. So how you work with this mixture of stakeholders in the jurisdictional, this is not something that you necessarily learn from the project intervention. So I think that this is one of the challenges to this process of this territorial approach that is also being part of markets, because markets are of course going to be to still work with project reductions, but also are moving to jurisdictional reductions, and challenges are important. And as I say, the FREL, all what Manuel has said is very important, and I think that it's also important that our countries, our Latin American countries, have to have have to be convinced that they have a voice to say in the international discussion. It's not a passive voice. It's not something that we have to say, okay, these are the rules, we cannot do anything about this. Yeah, we have to, we can say, and we have to say, we have to explain to the world what is the magnitude of the threat, what are the characteristics of the threat of deforestation. So standards and rules have to, and donors have to understand that this is it is different, maybe, that how things are occurring in other countries. And finally, the advice I already mentioned before, but I want to highlight and as I say before, with the experience of CCB, it has a lot to teach to everybody, and especially in investors. The best projects, the projects that are more sustainable on time, and I have visited some of the projects, small projects, compared maybe with other large projects, but small projects with a very large engagement of beneficiaries or partners. How do you want to say? Partners is better than beneficiaries. They don't need so much monitoring. They don't need so much resources, because the people is engaged. So I think that it is very important for investors to take very seriously safeguards. And if you talk with, for instance, with indigenous people, that has been one of the typical stakeholders that used to be has some reticence with REDD. Now they are open to REDD, but they are open to REDD with this rights approach. So this is important, to not just consider something extra or something optional. It has to be considered in the core of the business. I will stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jorge. And maybe we can follow with Chris, as before he was the last to speak. Chris, sure. If you would give some advice at project level, also with your broad expertise at project level.
Sure. So what updates have been developed in AFOLU carbon markets in the last years, and what are the challenges? I would say that there are three big changes in the last years that have taken place. First, I would say the introduction of regulated markets, such as in Colombia, have really changed how people are seeing the affordability or the financial viability of REDD projects. Second, I would say that there's been a movement away from, if we're talking about AFOLU in general, unfortunately, I'd say that the market has been trying to, essentially has been moving a little bit away from REDD and more into the afforestation and other kind of agriculture type projects, which is a shame. I think that there's been a couple of bad examples of REDD implementation that have essentially skewed public perception in perceiving that afforestation projects are more valuable than avoided deforestation projects, which is a shame, because it's clear that if these forests many times are not protected, they will end up as emissions just as much as emission reductions do generate from an afforestation project. And then lastly, I would say that one of the challenges to implement in these markets just tends to be, at least from the project level perspective, is the upfront cost, because as Jorge mentioned, like it doesn't necessarily need to be that expensive to implement a project, especially if you have a lot of community buy-in. But one of the things I would like to comment on is that to do a project right, it takes a lot of time and planning, and so that means a lot of investment that won't necessarily be seen with any kind of market mechanism return for some number of years. And so I would say that those are the three big changes or challenges to implementing the market right now. So what advice would I give to project developers like Indigenous peoples? Well, so if the Indigenous peoples are implementing the project, I think that they have far fewer challenges because they know how to design the project much more sustainably. So overall, for project developers who may not necessarily be Indigenous communities, I would say the biggest takeaway is to have a long-term perspective. So that is not only what is the long-term way to actually address drivers of deforestation, as opposed to simply halting the immediate deforestation actions through protection and things like that, which are often still very necessary even when you do address the drivers to deforestation. But properly addressing the drivers of deforestation could go a long way, but oftentimes do take a long time to properly address. Part of that is also, part of having that long-term perspective is having that local buy-in. That local buy-in is going to make the project much more sustainable, because again, as Jorge was pointing out, local communities then become advocates for the project itself. When problems do arise, the community is there to actually help and step in. And when you don't have community buy-in, when problems do arise, communities can actually make things worse. So it is paramount that project developers take the time to develop the local relationships with the local communities, as well as the local jurisdictional authorities and things like that, to ensure that the project will be successful. I would always advise, like, if your idea is have your project last for 20 or 30 years, I would say no, you really need to be taking your perspective much longer if you really want to have a truly successful project. Again, just that long-term perspective. As for investors, it's hard for me. The only thing I would come back to is the point that I made before, which is avoided deforestation projects can be just as valuable, if not more valuable, given the fact that you are often protecting very important biological ecosystems for communities, and or just the ecosystem services which local communities rely on. So while it is great if an area has been deforested to then try to reforest it, it can be much better to avoid that degradation or that deforestation in the first place, to ensure that the local ecosystem continues to function as normal. That's not really much of a tip for investors, but more so my personal kind of soapbox speech on the subject. I'll leave it there.
And Manuel, maybe if you want to share some insights on this.
Yes, thank you, Blanca. Well, I agree with everything that both Jorge and Chris have said. I would just add, for instance, in the first question about the updates. I mean, I think regarding this question, we have, as Chris mentioned, well, you have one side which is what has happened in the carbon market lately, and of course there is this part regarding the regulated carbon markets starting to interact with the voluntary carbon market. No, as Chris said, for instance, in countries as Colombia that have established a national emissions trading mechanism, but also internationally with the establishment of CORSIA, no, this mechanism that the aviation organization has established, no, and that allows for voluntary carbon players to actually have access to this regulated market, no? And through CORSIA, and also potentially through Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, no, which is still being negotiated, no. So that's interesting. Also, as I told you before, no, the boom in voluntary markets in the last few years, no? And then you have the other side, which is about updates. I mean, in the sense of how have the standards in the voluntary carbon markets evolved lately, no? And I think in that sense we have like one is expansion, I would say, that implies having new areas, no, new types of projects, for instance, blue carbon, no, projects that reduce emissions in peatlands or reduce emissions in mangroves, and so on, and other AFOLU project types. No? And then you also have like, I mean, besides the expansion, the scaling up. No, particularly with REDD, the idea is everyone's thinking about scaling up. No, and why? Because from REDD in the UNFCCC, you have this idea that REDD has to be carried out at the national and subnational level, no? Or subnational level as an interim phase. No, and also in the FCPF and also with the GCF and so on. No? So everyone has this idea now, and we have this situation that for REDD in particular, the idea is to scale up. No? And as I told you already, in BERRA we have a jurisdictional standard. No? I mean, the standard for jurisdictional programs that also allows for nesting projects into them. The funny thing is that this standard has been around since 2012. No one had used it before. And why? Basically because what I explained before, no? Countries were not ready. Countries did not have enough information, did not have enough institutional capacity, where they were not aware of opportunities. And after this readiness efforts, no? They are now in a situation where they can actually, you know, they have realized that, okay, I have these capacities, I have this data, maybe I have a reference level, maybe even I even have monitored data for a period after the reference level. What can I do with it? And then they see that the prices in the carbon market and the voluntary carbon markets are increasing. They see that their interest in the carbon market is also increasing, and they also see CORSIA, and they see the FCPF and the GCF, and they say, well, you know, let's try to take advantage of this situation. No? So they may be selling selling or getting payment for results from the GCF for some years, and then trying to sell some credits in the voluntary market for some other years that were not covered by this other source, and so on. No, like a diversification of finance sources. So, I mean, the case of REDD is that's the main trend, I would say. But I mean, it's important to mention also that this scaling up, in part to the urgency of mitigating climate change, cannot be carried out in every country. No, there are countries that are still lagging behind and do not have the capacity to establish a program that can generate carbon credits. No, that would have the the quality to reach market. No? So, and that's why, I mean, even if the trend is to scale up, you will have countries, I mean, this is like a stepwise approach, no? Where you will have countries where projects will still be the principal way of implementing REDD. Then you may have other countries, intermediate countries, let's say, where you would have regions of the country or provinces or states or municipalities that would have the REDD program. And then, I mean, the most advanced countries would have, I mean, in terms of REDD, would have this national program. So, it's also interesting to note that with this increasing visibility of the carbon market or the voluntary carbon market, what we have seen is a lot of scrutiny. You know? We now have all of the, you know, all of the eyes are on carbon markets and the methodologies. Everyone is now seeing if the methodologies are credible or not, or the standards are credible or not, which is good because, I mean, for us, it implies improving, you know, basically, or trying to find, as I was saying, you know, to expand the reach of our standards and methodologies. And but it's also true that in many cases, this criticism is not well understood, or arises from a not well understood, of not having a good understanding of how REDD methodologies work. So that's also something that we have seen. You can find a lot of articles lately saying, well, you know, you have a lot of projects with inflated baselines or they're incredible and so on, because, and this is the main argument, or the argument that we find more constantly is, I mean, now imagine the case of a project. By definition, the project area must be a forest, no? So that implies that this area has been a forest for at least 10 years. No? That's what we have in our standard, at least. So if you were to come up with a rate of deforestation for this area, and you use the historical data, the deforestation rate would be 0 or very low. So this deforestation rate may not represent or may not reflect the actual risk of deforestation that this project area is facing. I mean, also by definition, project developers try to find these areas where you know, deforestation hotspots, where projects, where forests are going to be in imminent threat in the coming years. So that's why I was telling you, no, the baseline methodologies for REDD projects are very difficult, because when you do this at the level of a jurisdiction or a country, you basically say, okay, what was my deforestation in the last 10 years? And I'm going to assume that the average of this deforestation, of these emissions from deforestation, is what we are going to have in the next 5-10 years. No? In the case of a project, as I was telling you, this approach doesn't work. So you have to come up with a reference region, which represents the situation of the project now, but 10 years ago, for instance, no? So as to be able to see what would happen to the project area in the future, no? Considering, you know, that, for instance, new roads may have been open, or that the deforestation frontier has come closer, and so on, no? And basically the evolution of the drivers, no? So, and that's the situation. If you take a look at the project area and you say, well, there is no deforestation there, and there has been no deforestation, so the project is not working. Or another classical is, well, the project area, we have seen that the project still has deforestation. How is it possible that this project is getting credits? No, how can it be producing carbon credits if there is deforestation in the project area? And the thing is, yes, projects may not reduce 100% of the deforestation in their areas, but that doesn't mean that they are not reducing emissions, because as I was telling you, no, the idea is that this area, without the project activities, may have been completely deforested in 10 years. So if after 10 years you have 10% of deforestation, it means that the project has been 90% effective. No, but that's something that you don't see if you don't go into the methodologies. No, and you would say, no, if this project has deforestation, then it's a failure. It's not the case. No, but anyway, so that's also something that we have been experiencing lately in the voluntary market, and which is fine. No, and as I was telling you, we are also trying to improve constantly, both at the jurisdiction level. That's why we are having an update of the jurisdictional standard and also in the project methodology. Then about the advice to project developers, indigenous people seeking. Well, I don't think I have much to add to what Chris and Jorge have already said. Maybe at this point in time, I would really urge them to approach governments and discuss with them what their plans are and how they are thinking about domestic markets, how they are thinking about REDD and the NDCs and so on, and carbon accounting in general in the country, no? Because it's becoming more and more important for them to have this very close relationship with government. So before, you may only need maybe a letter of approval to develop a project, saying that the country didn't have any objection for you for you developing the project, no. But now, in this context of scaling up and nesting and jurisdictional programs, this is becoming more and more important. No? And the advice to investors, well, investors, I think Chris already covered this in some way. I mean, what I would advise anyone trying to buy credits is to make sure that, I mean, first understand the standards, understand the market, and I mean, I will always advise, if you want to buy credits, and if you can, I mean, if you're a big buyer, no, to try to carry out that due diligence, no? To see a specific project. If the project is represent what you want to I mean, what your company is representing, no? If it represents your values, no? And for instance, you may want to invest in a project that has a CCP validation and verification on top of the BCS, for instance, no? Because you want to show that you're not only reducing emissions, but also enhancing biodiversity and protecting biodiversity and social benefits. No? So that, and I think that's it, basically. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you so much. And now, well, first of all, I don't know if we have questions. No, as we are running out of time. And sorry, one second. Yeah. I really would like to give a very special thank you to our panelists, that if you don't mind to switch on your cameras on the screen to say you goodbye. Thank you so much, really, for all your insights. I think it has been a very productive and useful conversation. We hope it has been useful also for the audience. We are also on live on YouTube, and this has been recorded, and we will put it in our organization website. And I think that certainly there is much to be learned and developed related to REDD and carbon markets in the region. But we are developing it and we are starting it. So I think there is a hopeful future for the region in this sense too. So thank you so much. I don't want to delay it anymore because the time. So thank you for your time today, and see you. And have a good evening.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Bye-bye. Thanks to
Bye,
you.
Jorge. Bye, Chris.
Bye, Manuel.
Very well.
Bye,
All right.
Chris.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Anna. You can stop if you want the YouTube and the record.